Hello, hello. Welcome back to the show. It's Nicole Holland here with one of my favorite authors. It's such an honor to have Gay Hendricks with us today. He's authored one of my favorite and most recommended books, The Big Leap, and he has a new book that we're going to dive into called The Joy of Genius. And it's a new way to end negative thinking and liberate your true creativity. So, Gay has been a leader in the fields of relationship transformation and body mind therapies for over 45 years. After earning his PhD in counseling psychology from Stanford, Gay served as a professor of counseling psychology at the University of Colorado for 21 years. He's written and co authored, along with his wife Katie, 35 books, including the bestseller Conscious Loving, used as a primary text in universities around the world. In 2003, Gay co-founded the Spiritual Cinema Circle, which distributes inspirational movies and conscious entertainment to subscribers in over 70 countries. Gay has offered seminars worldwide and appeared on more than 500 radio and television shows, including Oprah, CNN, CNBC, 48 Hours, and others. It's such a pleasure to have him here with us. Gay, welcome.
Thank you very much, Nicole. I'm really happy to be here. I'm a little hoarse today because I've been doing a lot of interviews recently since the new book came out, The Joy of Genius. But I'm here and I'm accompanied by my cat, Allie, who's taking a sound nap. I decided not to move her out of the room, so we may see her wander past the screen. She's a little bit of a camera hog, so if she wakes up, she may visit us during the interview.
That's perfect because my guy Dusty wants a lot of attention when I'm doing interviews. So if you hear any noises, he has a cone right now because he hurt himself. So he's making a lot of ruckus. So hopefully he'll be nice and quiet for our interview. But I'm so excited to have you here. And as I mentioned, The Big Leap is one of my favorite books, and it definitely my favorite book when it comes to um, really getting in touch with limiting behaviors. And I know that we all go through this. No matter what stage of life we're in, no matter how far we've come, there's always something holding us back. And what I love about The Joy of Genius is you really take it to the next level. And I'd love for, before we really dive into the concepts that you're teaching in The Joy of Genius, can you give us an overview of what is genius?
Yes, well, genius is doing what you most love to do in a way that makes your maximum contribution to other people. So many of us go through our lives without really tapping into what it is we really, above all, love to do. In other words, what is our sacred purpose for being here? And I started asking myself that probably in my late 20s or early 30s. And as I began to home in on that, I realized that this was my genius and this was what I really was here in a sense to teach. And so I was working a lot at the time with big executives from high-tech corporations because I lived in an area, Silicon Valley, where it was all the beginnings of Apple and all of that kind of thing. So there were these brilliant people, these brilliant software people and engineers, but they were completely out of touch with themselves from their neck down. They didn't know how to deal with anxiety and anger and fear and their sexuality. And, they were, in a way, they were so brilliantly smart, but almost all of them were kind of captivated at like a 12 or 13-year-old boy often level of emotional development. And so as I began to work with those folks, what began to happen was I began to work with them on unifying their mind and their body so that their mind was in harmony with their feelings, so that they weren't at odds with each other. And in that process, I realized that that alignment in ourselves was calling forth people's true genius. And so I began to work with this idea of that all of us have a genius inside us, which is what we most love to do and what could make our biggest contribution. And our task in life is to open up to what that is. And once that idea opened up in me, life has been, it's almost like nonstop learning and bliss and good times ever since then. Because if you make your life a quest for your genius and you're sincere about it, what begins to happen is life begins to cooperate you so that you have an opportunity to do more and more of what you most love to do. Like, for example, Nicole, think of what you're doing right now. This is what you love to do, right?
Definitely.
Yeah. And look at the long path it took you to get here. But
Absolutely.
but now look at how life is cooperating with you and bringing things to you that reflect this new state of consciousness, this new level of contribution you're making.
Absolutely. And I have to say again, like it's your work that has had probably the biggest impact on that happening. I think when you find a book that really resonates and teaches something concept, it's not just enough to read it and put it beside. It's something that you study. And I regularly go through the big leap. And whenever I'm having feelings of anxiety or feelings of not deserving, um, this is something I come back to over and over is your work. And I was really excited when you put out The Joy of Genius recently, and also attended, you did a special training on that a few weeks ago. And it was fantastic because I think that we're never going to be there. Like there's always something that there's always work to be done. And one of the things I really love in both books, um, is how you use your own personal stories, even as far as you've come, and even as conscious as you are, you still also are facing issues that you talk about in the book. And I think that also gives us permission to be human. I think sometimes, especially entrepreneurs, business owners, type A people who are driven, um, are really the hardest on themselves.
Yes, and because, like one of my old teachers used to say, you're either going to have heel prints on your bottom or toe prints on your bottom. In other words, if you don't get in the process of kicking your own butt, life is going to kick it for you. And so a lot of our work has to do with taking the big leap into taking responsibility for inviting forth your own genius. And the great thing about it is it doesn't matter if you only spend 10 minutes a day exploring that. That's what I start with around here is when people come to me, it doesn't matter if they're the economy minister of Finland or a presidential candidate or a Hollywood star or a person just in a regular old business. Everybody here starts with 10 minutes of pure genius. In other words, if all they do during that 10 minutes is ask themselves, what is my genius? Hmm, what is my genius? Many people we have spend the entire 10 minutes doing that. But if you will start with spending 10 minutes a day on your genius, it's addictive and contagious. It starts requiring more and more to do. But the more and more you do, the better you feel, the healthier you get, the more fun you are to be around. And so the act of opening up, I mean, look at the quality of how I don't know anything about you, but I can just tell from looking at you that look at how your life has changed since you made the commitment to inviting forth your genius. You know, the quality of the life you're living, the quality of friends you have, any measure, I can bet it's better.
Oh, for sure. And something you just said, this is something that, you really teach a lot of in the Joy of Genius, which is those wondering questions. And can you explain why wondering, first of all, kind of what wondering questions are, even though you just gave us an example, but also why these are so imperative for our own personal and professional development?
Yes, absolutely. Well, first of all, wonder is the opposite end of a spectrum, and on the other end is fear. So when you're in wonder, you're in a free state of inquiring into something. You're saying, I don't know, but I'd really like to know. I don't know, and I'd really like to know. So, what is the, just like Einstein, I have a picture of him on my wall, one of my proud possessions here that my wife Katie gave me many years ago for my birthday as an autographed picture of Albert Einstein. And from his notebooks, he spent, I think, 27 years wondering about a particular question in physics. Every day he'd be out on the beach walking and he'd be wondering about it. Or if he was riding his bicycle or wherever he was wondering about it for 27 years straight before he kind of figured something out. Well, that to me, bless his heart, because great genius like that comes out of great wonder. And I think any of us has the potential of opening up. Now, we may not be a physicist. My genius may be in writing books that are easy to understand, like The Big Leap. That was my intention from the beginning, to explain really complicated things so simply that everybody could understand them. And so all of my books are about taking really complicated things and putting them in very practical terms. Because what used to drive me crazy when I was in college and graduate school, we'd listen to these huge lectures, and then I was always the annoying person that would raise my hand and say, but exactly how do I apply that practically, like when I'm actually working with another person? And the professor would usually go, but nobody could come up with the answer. So I think, okay, here's a niche. I'm going to make a career out of taking really good stuff and explaining it so people can really use it. And like in the stuff with the Big Leap, there was this legendary psychiatrist around San Francisco named Joseph Weiss, MD. And everybody that could possibly hear about him, he wasn't famous or anything, but you tried to figure out what he was thinking, and some of those ideas in the Big Leap trace themselves back through his work to other psychology and psychiatrist people. But what I want people to know about it is, forget all the theory. Just notice what happens when you begin to let me take a look at some of the fears that may be blocking my genius. And so you look into some of those fears, like I talk about in the Big Leap, like the fear of outshining other people, and the fear that there's something fundamentally wrong with me, so that if I get more famous or wealthier or better liked or whatever, people will see more of my negative flaws. So if you have those kind of negative beliefs that are rooted in fear, where you have to start is opening up to those and inquiring into those and feeling where you feel them in your body, and breathing with them. It's not a complicated process, but it's just something that you kind of need to learn, like riding a bicycle is learning how to deal with energy in your body. And it's one of those advanced learnings that life requires us to get. And if you don't learn it in your 20s, you got to learn it in your 30s. And if you don't learn it in your 30s, you got to learn it in your 40s. And so how to steer your own energy system is very, very important in life. So what happens is, as you begin to inquire into those fears and understand them a little bit better and put a name on them, that's all I did in the Big Leap. I tried to give people a name to put on them, because sometimes if you can point and name at something, it's, once you see the category it fits in, then it's not as scary. So with the genius aspect, I now see it as what I call a genius spiral. It's no longer an enclosed zone like I kind of thought of it as earlier, but I don't think of it as the zone of genius anymore. When I think of it as getting on the genius spiral, because there are no blocks or zones, because frankly, those three zones I talk about in the Big Leap, the zone of incompetence, where you're doing things that you're not very good at, and the zone of competence, where you're doing stuff you're good at but somebody else could do just as well. And even the zone of excellence, where you're doing things that you're better at than most people, that make you money, that get you fame or whatever it is that you like in life, the stuff that you use to get ahead in life, that's often in your zone of genius. And what I said in The Big Leap is nobody is ever really happy in the zone of excellence. It's only when you can move through that and take your excellence with you into the zone of genius, into the genius spiral, that's where great life satisfaction is. And so the more you can open up and get on the genius spiral, you'll notice even after a couple of years of expansion, you'll still be identifying things in your zone of incompetence. I see you nodding your head.
Yes, absolutely. So with the genius spiral, you also, I don't know if you want to go there and like kind of break that down a little bit more, or if it might make sense to talk about the genius move.
Yes,
Would
well,
you?
let's blend a little bit of that together.
Perfect.
Um, well, let's talk about the genius move first, okay? Because what I identify in the joy of genius is a particular thing that you can do in any life situation where you don't feel good, or you feel a little stressed, or you're feeling something other than optimal. You're feeling anxiety. So in those moments, I show you a way in the book of putting those into a category and deciding whether they are something you can control or not. Is the thing that you're thinking about something that you have any control over whatsoever? Like, for example, if it has to do with the thinking or feeling of other people, if you're sort of trying to control how other people are feeling in some situation, well, that's useless, because the more you try to control it, the more it gets out of control because you're trying to control it. And so I've had experiences like that in my own life that I talk about in the book. I mean, some outrageous ones, that I still go, oh, like in my 20s, I used to groan about some of the things I did in my teens. And then when I got to my 30s, I would groan about some of the things that I did in my 20s. And on it goes like that. Fortunately, though, Winston Churchill once said that when you're 20, you're very concerned about what other people think of you. And when you get to be 40, you realize that you're not as concerned about that anymore. And then when you're 60, you realize they were never thinking about you anyway. And I found that to be absolutely to be true now that I'm post 60.
Fantastic. So, those things that you mentioned, I think often they come back to incompletion. Is that right? Do you want to talk a little bit about the how incompletion is the root of a lot of this stuff?
Yeah, if you inspect the stuff that goes on in your mind, the good stuff and the clatter and the chatter and all that, whether it's an unpleasant thought or a pleasant thought, a lot of those thoughts come from situations we have left incomplete. For example, let's say I'm mad at somebody, and then we happen to meet on the street, and I start to tell him about something I'm angry about. And then I decide not to for whatever reason. I don't have time or yada, yada. And so then I walk off from that situation. But I notice that I'm thinking about it more and more and more and more. It's occupying more and more of my mind space. And so that's a kind of a simple example, but in one way or the other, in a situation where we walk away from it without communicating the bottom line truth of whatever it is, that's one type of incompletion. Or if you start some project that's important to you and then you set it aside and don't consciously complete it. Sometimes you have to complete things by deciding to leave them incomplete. You need to say, okay, like, for example, in my case, I've got something like maybe 12 or 14 unfinished books on my computer. But they don't gnaw at me because I've said to each of them, I've said consciously, okay, I'm I'm going to work on something else right now that's more interesting or more fun or more lucrative or whatever the thing is, and I'm going to consciously just leave you be. So in other words, I'm kind of not inviting a lot more creative thoughts about that project. I'm consciously completing it. But I've met people that failed to complete their master's degree or their PhD 30 years ago, and they're still talking about it or somehow cognating about it. So if what I invite people to do is start keeping a list. Like when I started doing it, I came up with this amazing long list. I think it was a dozen pages or so in my own handwriting of things that I'd left incomplete, people I hadn't apologized to, for example, or in one case, a guy that I owed $160 to, and I hadn't paid him back because we got into a hassle and I ended up quitting the job. And so I used that as justification not to pay him back. But fortunately, one day I realized, oh, just because I'm mad at him doesn't give me permission to avoid my responsibilities or avoid keeping my agreements. And so I think I told this story in the Big Leap. But anyway, I had to track the guy down to find out where he was. And it turned out that his life had turned upside down so that when I knew him, he was driving a Cadillac, very wealthy guy and everything. And then life had handed him a big whopper. And so it behooved me to track him down for two reasons. First, it was helpful to him to get some money back. And it was helpful to me because it closed a loop. And what I invite people to do is go around and close those loops, because if you leave the loops open, they drain your creative energy. Big issue for people is leaving those little loops open, not saying what they really wanted to say, or not completing something they said they were going to do, or not keeping an agreement. Each of these things we leave a loop open on. And the biggest ones we leave open with ourselves, unfortunately. Like we'll make a commitment, like I see people all the time that make a commitment to, like an assignment we give here is to spend 10 minutes a day on your genius for the first 7 days. But all the time people will come back and say, oh yeah, well, it worked great for 3 days, but on Thursday, my dog got sick, you know, and so I couldn't keep my agreements. So we have all these little ways of justifying, but to me, it's all about, if it hadn't been the dog getting sick, it would have been something else. Because once you make a commitment to your genius, you're going to get presented with things that ask the question, are you serious about this? And we have to keep saying, yes, I'm serious about it, and keep focusing on your genius. And then your life begins to pay off, as it has for you, obviously.
It has, but this is something that personally I struggle with. And it's so funny. I love that you said that about it's the are you serious? Because when I quit my job as a correctional officer about 4 years ago, it was very much that I quit. I decided this is not what I was going to do. I put in my resignation, and that very day, my my furnace went out in the middle of massively bad snowstorms. And so anybody who's not from a cold climate may not understand, but you have to have heat. Like it's not an option to not have heat. And if you don't, your pipes can burst. And, it's very devastating. And so this was a Friday evening, of course, when it happened. And I just stood there on the porch and went, all right, all right, yeah, I'm serious. No matter what it takes, I'm not going back. I'm working for myself. And I've had a number of those situations. In fact, right now, as we're recording, my cat did get sick last a couple weeks ago, and he had to go to the doctor, and all kinds of other things have happened. As we're recording, I am getting ready for the launch of this new show. And I just consciously decided yesterday that something I really, really, really wanted to do, which was have a big launch party in New York City, wasn't the best thing for the creativity and for this endeavor. And so I decided to not do it and sent out an email to everybody that was supporting it. So I love that you talk about this, because I think we are so hard on ourselves oftentimes when we commit to something and we say, yes, I'm going to do this. And then we lose the inspiration, or things change, or we reevaluate and realize, like you said, you let your books know, I am going to leave you be for now, and that's okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. So, in terms of the genius spiral, can you share a little bit more about how this works?
Yes. Somewhere in the book, let me see if I can just find it quickly. There's a section called Three Boxes and a Spiral. And I just wanted to show you a picture of the genius spiral. Um, and you can get this on the website too. Um, but it has the three boxes, the box of incompetence and the box of competence and the box of excellence. And so for starters, start getting out of those three zones. That'll help you really begin to stabilize yourself on your genius spiral. But here's the big opening question. And it gets back to this issue of, are you serious? In the first part of the new book, The Joy of Genius, I offer people a commitment to make, a commitment to their genius, to commit to ending their negative thinking and bringing forth their true creativity. And if people can do that, if people will be willing to make a sincere commitment, just the way I show them how in the book, that opens up doors that can't be opened any other way. Just like in a relationship, Nicole, if I'm in a relationship and my partner can sense that I am deeply committed to her, in my case with Katie, a whole world of possibility opens up. If we're completely feel in our hearts a commitment to the other person and that person feels that in their hearts, then this flow of genuine intimacy takes place. This is on my mind because we just celebrated our 37th wedding anniversary. Yeah, I had a wonderful time. Um, we went down to LA and saw a concert with the Disney at the Disney Hall with this great acoustics, and the LA Philharmonic along with the electronic musician Moby. It was a magical evening. And then we stayed for Joni Mitchell's 75th birthday party. And that was also incredible because all of these people came and sang Joni Mitchell songs. Chris Christopherson and all these great singers came and sang Joni Mitchell songs. So the flow of intimacy can only be evoked by a deep commitment. And the very same thing is true for your genius, for your true creativity. It's evoked through a commitment of yours. So I offer this commitment in the book, and we can just do a version of it right here for people who are viewers of your show. Just take a moment and ask yourself, am I willing to be sincere about a commitment? Just kind of feel if you're in a mood that you could be sincere about something. So you could truly say something authentic. The idea is that I commit to ending my negative thinking and liberating my true creativity. So just take a moment and find out if you would be willing to make a sincere commitment to that. And if you would, I'll repeat it again and say it in your mind a few times. So here we go. I commit to ending my negative thinking and liberating my true creativity. I commit to ending my negative thinking and liberating my true creativity. Try that on a few times. Just say it and feel it 3 or 4 times, and then we'll talk again in 30 seconds or so. There are never any right or wrong answers in this kind of inquiry. So just notice whatever you noticed happened in that time. And we do this because your body and mind will gravitate to a better idea if the tone is sounded clearly. So if you make a sincere commitment, for example, to ending your negative thinking and liberating your true creativity, you're sounding a tone. You're going, okay, this is the tone I want. And then your body and mind begin to tune themselves to that particular tone. And so it's an organic process. It doesn't usually happen overnight. You know, some people do have a blinding flash of enlightenment, but most of us, the light slowly dawns on us. But the place to begin is with a commitment to your own creativity, because genius and true creativity are really the same thing. Your genius is made up of what you most love to do and what would make the biggest contribution for you. So for me, I figured out when I was about 35, I figured out a lot of the stuff we're talking about, and I realized, okay, what I really want to do is spend my time, all my time, doing what I most love to do, which is talking or writing about people's highest potential and inviting them in on how they can reach their highest potential. That interests me. I could do that all day long. That's what I love to do. And the more I realized I'm only allowing myself to do that 10% of my time. Clong. And so I begin to look for ways that I could spend more of my time doing that. And pretty soon that led to being able to do it 30% of the time. That took me a few years. But gradually I expanded so that for the last 20 years or so, since I'd say the late 90s, I've spent all my time doing what I absolutely love to do. And to me, that's the best kind of living, because to go from 10% doing what I most love to do to 90%, and the rest of my time I spend sleeping or getting around from place to place, all the stuff that you have to do. But most of my waking hours are spent doing some version of what I'm doing right now. And that pleases me greatly, because originally, 35 years ago, I set out to create a job I wouldn't ever want to retire from. Here I am, you know?
Amazing. And that's it's so lovely. Thank you also for sharing the exercise for my listeners to go through. And guys, if you are listening on the podcast, you could always come over to the Nicole Holland Show, where you'll see Gay and I in color, although I'm very blue today. I've figured out that it's because of my blue wall and then having my lights. So we'll be fixing this soon. um, but yeah, you can come over
You're
and
you're mostly blue, except for your hair is a little purple.
yes, well, it should be purple and my mic should be purple.
Okay.
It's the reflection. So, um, yeah, come on over to the Nicole Holland Show and you'll be able to, on the show notes page, see the video, see Gay and the book. And I'll also, of course, have a link to both The Joy of Genius and The Big Leap there for you. I highly recommend both of them. And not only to get them, but also to implement. Like I said earlier, Gay's work is not something that you'll just read one time and be like, okay, done. It's all actionable. It's all life changing incrementally. And Gay, I love that you mentioned that it didn't happen overnight. You know, you went from not very much to 30%, but it took years. It took some time. I think a lot of times people want instant gratification. They want things to instantly and magically change. What's your take on that? That feeling of, I need this now.
Well, I think it's, occasionally a person will have a blinding flash of illumination, but most of the time, the things that are organic and stick with you over time are things that you have to pay attention to. It's just an inevitable fact of life that like the Beatles were overnight sensations because they'd spent thousands of hours practicing their songs in a nightclub where they were getting paid $8 a night. And my first group that I ran had, I think, 6 people in it or something like that. So the Louis Pasteur once said that chance favors the prepared mind. So, you need to, and another great quote that we have here somewhere was from the Tibetan teacher Choyam Trungpa, because after he had been kind of in poverty a good bit of his life, one of his disciples gave him $1 million to build a center in Boulder. And they asked him how it felt, to come from poverty in Tibet and then suddenly be an American millionaire. And he said, if you work passionately and quietly, such auspicious coincidences are bound to occur. That they're a function of heartful, mindful practice. So that's why I always start people with making a sincere commitment. Because really, if you make a sincere commitment to inviting forth your genius, the ways to do it will show up in your life. And then if you're wise, you'll gravitate to the ones that show up and not push things away. So it starts with your commitment. In my experience, once I really got committed to bringing forth my genius, it was almost all organic. Things would come to me, people would say something to me, a person would offer me an opportunity. And just one thing I always say, once you love yourself and figure out what your purpose is, the universe will fall all over itself supporting you. It'll just be one thing after the other. You'll have an opportunity. If you miss one, you'll get another one. And so, but it comes out of that deep commitment to bringing forth your genius. So that's the great starting place. Even if you, after you hear all this, if you didn't do anything but just say that in your mind a few times a day, it would gradually begin to take place. But if you will be gutsy and mindful enough to engage in that 10 minutes a day, put it in your calendar, your genius time, your time on the genius spiral. And again, all you need to do is just do something that supports your genius for 10 minutes. Make a phone call, meditate, doodle, whatever it is, but dedicate it, and you'll see that the next week you may want 20 minutes. It's like a friend of mine, Scott. He was 30 pounds overweight and out of shape, but he hated the idea of going to a gym because he didn't want to hurt. So he came up with this great practice. He did 1 chin-up a day for the first 7 days. And then in the second week, he did 2 chin-ups a day. And then he would go swim and do other things. So you see how it would go. By the 4th or 5th week, he's got to where he can do 4 or 5 chin-ups. By the time he gets halfway through the year, he's now doing 25 or 30 chin-ups. So by the end of the year, he could do 50-some chin-ups and keep on going. But it was all done without so much pain, because if you go to the gym and you try to do 52 the first day, your muscles may ache. So I recommend people starting with something they can be comfortable with, whether it's 10 minutes or 20 minutes or an hour or whatever, but just make sure you do it, because like I say in The Joy of Genius, your genius needs to be wooed like a beloved needs to be wooed. Like one of my mentors, Milton Erickson, used to say that, a couple, if they wanted to make love that evening, should start by making a salad together at lunch. That the idea of one kind of relationship feeds into another kind of relationship. And so I think that as we open up to ourselves on the genius spiral, life begins to support us in ways that it feels like those invisible wind currents that a hawk rides up in a spiral. In fact, that's where I got the idea for the spiral. The genius spiral was on our wedding day in Colorado 37 years ago. My wife and I were on a mountaintop saying our vows to each other, and we looked up and there was this beautiful hawk circling right above us as we were saying our vows. And we kept looking up as we went through our vows to each other, and he was just circling lazily further and further up into the sky in this lazy circle. And he did that the whole time we were saying our vows to each other. And then suddenly he was gone. And we always considered it kind of like a animal blessing or a totem blessing on our wedding. And that spiral idea then comes to life. As you can see on the cover of the new book, we have the goldfish from the big leap, but it turns into this spiraling bird up here. And so I think the transition for me now is complete. I wrote The Big Leap, and then after a few years, I realized that I hadn't quite taken this other step and didn't quite know how to take this other step. But as I thought about it over the past few years, suddenly it became clear to me how to write The Joy of Genius. So I feel like I've had like a 10-year baby here finally come out into the world, and I'm very ah.
That's so wonderful. And myself, and I'm sure hundreds of thousands of people, if not millions, are very appreciative as well that you had that inspiration to birth the joy of genius and I guess close the loop.
That's
So
the plan.
thank you very much. So before we go, Gay, is there anything you'd like to share with my listeners? Any kind of final words of wisdom and takeaway? And also, I'd love to have you tell us how my listeners can learn more from you and continue the conversation.
Good. Well, a lot of cool things are at the book's website, which is joyofgenius.com. There's a great trailer from the for the book there at Joy of Genius, and so I invite people to go watch the trailer. It was made by a Hollywood buddy of mine, Cameron Keyes, and a famous trailer maker. And so the trailer is there, and lots of other interesting things to do and see there. Everybody can always get hold of us through our website, hendricks.com, hendricks.com. And so I invite people to check out all the resources there. Uh, in final words, I would say that any moment you spend on your genius, even if it's, what is my genius, will come back to you in the form of many, many, many blessings. And ultimately, in my view, the only way to really feel happy all the time is to live on the genius spiral all the time. And so after 35 years of living on the genius spiral now in one form or the other, I feel confident in saying that it's a path that I recommend to everyone because I've never seen any downside that occurred out of the inquiry into what your genius is. So whether you do it through the book, The Joy of Genius, or The Big Leap, or however you do it on your own, that's my blessings to you, is that you find that spark of genius and let it come into full flower in you.
Wonderful. Gay, thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks a lot, Nicole.